Now let's reflect on Anne's remarkable life.
The first CPAC GB in Sadiq Khan's Londonistan this week was always going to be a very interesting affair for a whole load of reasons. I'm very honest about the fact that even though I was very privileged to be there and to be part of one of the panels about the new media, I also have serious concerns about the fact that this organisation seems to be favouring one side of the right, Reform UK and Nigel Farage, who was made a keynote speaker, while blocking out others, including the Restore Britain leader, Rupert Lowe, clearly a force on the right of British politics, and Tommy Robinson, not a mainstream politician, but certainly a huge part of the right-wing movement. So I had my own issues with the conference, but then after the assassination of my friend Anne Widdecombe, it actually meant so much more, I think, to be able to be with a group of widely like-minded people who understand the threat that we are under. Liz Truss, the former Prime Minister, is the woman who decided to bring CPAC, which is run by Matt Schlapp and was really the only conservative organisation in the United States that stayed steadfastly loyal to Donald Trump during his time out of office. And Truss began the conference with what became a very emotional tribute to Widdy. Saw her break down in tears on the stage. Watch.
She was a kind and generous human being, and we are all so devastated that she has been taken from us. Now let's reflect on Anne's remarkable life.
And it was really interesting for me to see Liz upset like that, because she's not usually a particularly emotional woman. Certainly after everything she had gone through with her own career, no tears whatsoever. Not like Starmer, not like Theresa May, but she was close to Widdy, and she had recounted the fact that they had even been friends when Liz had young children, and Anne had been very good with her young children. So I think the loss of Widdy impacted us all. But there was a broader point of this conference, and it was to bring the best of the conservative movement from around the world together in London with some of our conservative stars to try and give us a bit of hope. And one of America's top independent broadcasters, the close friend of the late Charlie Kirk, the colleague of the late Charlie Kirk, Jack Posobiec, quite rightly used the story of Henry Novak, the tragic story of Henry Novak, to insist that Brits must reject two-tier policing.
That because of the color of his skin, because he happened to be a young white man, that he hadn't been stabbed. He must have been the aggressor. He was the one who was put in handcuffs as he died. This cannot stand. This cannot stand in Britain. It cannot stand in America. It cannot stand anywhere in the West. We will not accept two-tier policing. We will not accept two-tier justice. We will not accept two-tier anything. No.
Reform UK's Matt Goodwin, or Matt Badloss, as the wags at the hotel were referring to him after Gorton and Denton, revealed a fascinating and very telling private conversation with the Trump advisor in Washington, D.C.
And you know, I was recently in Washington, and one of President Trump's advisors turned to me, and he said something profound. He said, you know, I just visited London for the first time in 20 years. And he said, I was completely shocked, not just because of the mass immigration, not just because of the open borders, not just because of the record taxes and the insane energy policy, but because of the extent to which your leaders seem to hate your own people.
Suella Braverman spoke up for the white working classes.
It's a crisis that doesn't tick the fashionable boxes that preoccupy the liberal elites. I want to talk to you about our white working class children, and in particular, our boys. Boys and girls whose grandparents and great-grandparents mined our coal, built our ships, ran our factories and fought our wars. Because the brutal truth is that we are failing them. Not by accident, but through neglect.
Jacob Rees-Mogg was one of the only optimistic people in the room. Are you tired of being lied to by the media? Then subscribe to Outspoken. Real stories, real opinions, no censorship. It's totally free. Let's go.
Because it is so important that whatever wing of politics you're on, you're interested in ideas. And sometimes we think that the blob is against us, the universities are against us, and therefore the intellect is against us. But we must never accept that. Because however strong the blob is, we need to be generating ideas that make conservatism fit for government in this country.
But when I took to the stage as part of a panel on the new media hosted by the CPAC boss, Matt Schlapp, very much a great guy, and my friend Mike Graham, amongst others, I have to be honest, I was noticing a real elephant in the room. 2 elephants in the room, actually. No one had even mentioned once, not once, the Restore Britain leader Rupert Lowe or the Unite the Kingdom activist Tommy Robinson. And I understand that it was a pro-Reform UK event, fundamentally, because Nigel Farage was a keynote speaker. And so as a result, there was a huge amount of negotiation that went into making sure that he would turn up. And we know he didn't even turn up to the Spectator Garden Party because he didn't want to come face-to-face with Rupert Lowe. But for an organisation that is all about uniting the right, I don't think, tell me if I'm wrong, I'm happy if you disagree, but I don't think we can keep ignoring Rupert and Tommy. Do you? So I had to raise it.
But it is also naive if we say that we don't need a leader. Of course we need a leader. How did America change? Donald Trump. One of probably the big issues in the United Kingdom at the moment, and I'm probably one of the only people on the right that actually talks about it, is that there is such a split on the right. Because we have 3 big leaders, I would argue, in Nigel Farage and Reform UK. He's a keynote speaker here this weekend. This is a very pro-reform event. But there is also Rupert Lowe and Restore Britain, and leading the street movement, Tommy Robinson and Unite the Kingdom. Plus then you do have Kemi Badenoch trying to sort of make the Conservatives conservative again. So there is a significant split on the right of British politics. Donald Trump was able to bring the American right together. I think there is much more of a challenge here about how that happens.
All right,
There was another real debate in the room about whether it made sense for the mainstream media, the likes of LBC and the Daily Mirror and Politics Joe and all the usual suspects, to have been allowed in when a lot of really great conservatives had not really been welcomed in, given that all they did right from the start of the day was try and humiliate CPAC GB, try and make CPAC GB look like a flop, posting pictures of empty chairs. And sure, it wasn't a particularly well-attended event. And I think that's a shame. And I think it's because Liz Truss didn't want to include Restore Britain, didn't want to include Tommy Robinson, and Reform UK already have a lot of big events, right? That's my view. It was very expensive. We ran an offer here on Outspoken in order to bring the price down, but it was an expensive event. But at the same time, do we really want to keep allowing these idiots, these enemies into our spaces? This is what I said.
Today, sorry to interrupt, but today there are people in this room, there are enemies in this room. Today, I've already seen it, the Daily Mirror, Politics Joe, who are writing shit about this conference already. Why are they here? Seriously, who let them in? I just say, it's pathetic.
And Mike Graham, who used to work at the Daily Mirror, explained why his old employer's inevitable death will be coming in only a couple of years.
Because nobody cares. But the problem with all of these people is they've got diminishing audiences as well. You know, I used to work for the Daily Mirror, believe it or not, years ago, and we used to sell, when I was there, about 1.5 million copies a day, something like that, and it's now down to about 300,000. So, I mean, their audience is dying off. The older people that buy the newspaper are not going to be buying it in 2 years' time, and they'll be shutting it down.
And Matt Schlapp then finished up by asking both myself and Mike Graham if the right can claim victory at our next general election. But first, do you remember when energy used to feel effortless? You'd get through a workout, a long day, a bad night's sleep, and still feel sharp. But as you get older, trust me, it can start to feel like your body and brain don't have the same spark they used to. Here's the interesting part. That's not in your head. It's biology. When we're younger, our bodies naturally produce and regenerate high levels of creatine. But as we move into our 40s and beyond, that production steadily declines. And that means less readily available energy for both our muscles and our brains. That's exactly why Qualia Creatine Plus was created. Here's the key thing though. You can't just take any old creatine and assume it's doing the job. It has to actually get into your cells and then be activated so your body can use it properly. That's why Qualia Creatine Plus is different. It combines 2 clinically studied forms of creatine with electrolytes, all chosen to support absorption and activation. It includes easy-to-mix micronized creatine monohydrate in a new form called OptiCreatine, plus creatine magna power, along with a precise amount of sea salt to help support uptake where it matters most. What makes this stand out is that it's not just creatine, it's the delivery system your body needs to make it work for you. We're way past the dark ages of creatine being just for gym bros. Creatine is critical for energy, metabolism, cognition, and healthy aging, not just lifting like a bodybuilder. So go to qualialife.com/Dan for 50% off. And here's a bonus. Use the code Dan for an additional 15% off your order. That's QUALIA life.com/Dan and use the code Dan. And thank you so much to Qualia for sponsoring this episode. Now, back to the show.
Sitting here after your next national election, are we winners or losers?
I think we're winners.
I hope we're winners. I'm nervous. I am very, very nervous. Andy Burnham is much, much more of a threat than the right want to believe at this point.
Leo Kearse, the independent YouTube sensation, joins me now. Leo, we were both at CPAC Australia last year in Brisbane. And it was an amazing event. Actually, huge amount of power and positivity in the room. And I don't know about you, I didn't feel like the right was as divided in Australia. Of course, there are different parties over there. There's One Nation and the Liberals and the Nationals, but it still felt like quite a positive, unified room. And look, I backed CPAC GB. You know, I had Liz Truss on this show. We ran a discount offer for our viewers. I agreed to attend and was part of that panel. But I'm also not going to lie, like it wasn't the big success that we hoped it would be. Yes, it is the first year, but there were a lot of empty seats. You can't deny that, even though I do think it was very intellectually dishonest what those left-wing publications did, because they took the pictures at 9 a.m., right? I was still asleep at 9 a.m. You know, by the time my session was on at 2:30, actually the room was pretty much full. But I do worry, Leo, that it's a little bit naive to say, oh, we're having a big conference about uniting the right. But, you know, Rupert Lower's banned and you know, Tommy Robinson is the Antichrist. Well, then you're not going to unite the right, are you? Like, how is it any different to a Reform UK conference in that case? Do you understand the point?
Yeah, although I guess the counter argument to that would be, you know, these people have baggage that I think is quite unfair. You know, in the case of Tommy Robinson, I think he's been unfairly vilified by the media, and also people haven't appreciated that, you know, 20 years ago he was quite a different man with quite different views, and now his movement is very positive. It's not at all, you know, he gets described as a white nationalist, which just factually isn't correct. He's a civic nationalist, and I think, you know, by the standards of history, he's quite a liberal, forward-thinking guy. And the other aspect is that, I guess, Restore are seen as damaging reform. We saw in the Makerfield by-election, Restore fielded a candidate. I don't know, people will say, oh, but if you combine the Restore vote and the Reform vote, they still wouldn't have beaten Andy Burnham. But we don't know that that's true, because one of the things that people vote for is momentum and the sense that it's worth voting because you're going to win. And I think Restore coming in and fighting against the Reform candidate destroyed that feeling of Reform being on the upper foot. And now we can see how we're going to suffer the result of that through having Andy Burnham deliver the most left-wing government we've ever had with hope not hate in a senior position. So
yes, but my answer about the conference, though, because obviously that was the counter argument that came up. But my argument is just pretending, right, which is what GB News do and Talk TV do, and in some ways what CPAC did. Just pretending that Tommy and Rupert are not there isn't going to work. It never works. I mean, look at this Manchester mayoral election, which is taking place because, of course, Andy Burnham won in Makerfield. Well, the most recent poll I saw, Leo, and look, it's only one poll, had Restore at 9% of the vote. I mean, that is astonishing because even 2 to 3% of the vote is basically going to stop Reform UK winning enough seats to govern, probably, like according to their own internal polling. So absolutely hear what you're saying. It's a fair argument, but then Restore people come back and say, well, Nigel shouldn't have, called the police on Rupert Lowe. We can go through all of that. But when it comes to CPAC, isn't the point that you can't just keep ignoring these people and hoping they go away? I would say Tommy Robinson isn't going away, right? Like, he's a huge force. Look at what Unite the Kingdom is. No one else could do that on the streets of London. And I would also argue that Rupert Lowe has proven that with Elon Musk's backing and with the appearance on the Joe Rogan podcast, the biggest podcast in the world, he ain't going away either.
Yeah, but how do you bring these disparate elements together when there's so much bitterness between them?
Well, isn't the start to talk, though? Sorry to interrupt, but isn't the start of that process, Leo, to talk, to have them in the same room? Maybe if Nigel and Rupert actually happen to be in the same room, you know how these things work. Like, you bump into someone, I've had a bit of an issue with them a few years ago. Actually, have a drink. Maybe I'm being naive, but I just think this idea of trying to keep them all in silos and you ban people from this event, that certainly isn't going to work.
Yeah, no, I agree. And we saw this at CPAC in Australia. So One Nation, who are the insurgent party, are welcomed in, even though obviously they're damaging the electoral chances of the legacy right-wing party. But they're welcomed in, and I think there's cross-pollination of ideas, and I think the right emerges stronger. And I think it's one of the failures of the right. I guess the essence of being right-wing is that you're an individualist. So there's going to be more fracturing on the right. But this next election could be the last chance we have to save Britain. So the right really needs to get its act together, and everybody needs to pull in the same direction.
Totally. And look, I agree with that. I totally agree with that. And I actually said on stage, I agree with that. But I guess it's all about how we get there. And I'm pretty sure I'm going to be proven right that ignoring Tommy Robinson, ignoring Rupert Lowe, ignoring Restore Britain is not going to be the way to unite the right. That's what I see this sort of right-wing establishment doing. The Daily Mail, the Daily Telegraph. Because, they only talk about Rupert or Tommy if it's like, they're being arrested or, far right. Only negative. Only ever negative coverage. We see it. I don't think it's going to work, but look, time's going to tell. But I thought CPAC GB was interesting. I know some people will take what I'm saying as being critical. Actually, I'm not being critical. I love CPAC as an event. I just think it could have been so much better. And of course, we need these things to be bigger and better if we do have any hope of bringing the right together and winning. Dan Wotton Outspoken is your no spin, no bias, no censorship outlet for independent news. We have no big tech backing or billionaires pulling